Good morning, everybody. I'm Jack Bosley with the Digital Innovation Team, the Zone 1 leader. I want to welcome everybody back to the newest season of the Digital Learning Channel. Um, I'm going to be moderating today. I've got several of my teammates who are going to be monitoring the chat, so be sure to pop into the chat, introduce yourself, and let us know if you have any questions. Um, Thanks again for joining us this season. Today I'm here with a great panel to help kick things off with Suzanne Kramer, Joe McKim, and Maddie Shepard, and they are going to be talking about the curriculum and instructional frameworks for JCPS. So, ladies, I'm going to turn that over to you.
I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I'll be our pilot in terms of driving the slide deck. You'll be hearing from Suzanne, Joe, and myself as we talk about the curriculum and instructional frameworks. Jack, can we see the slide deck?
It looks good from my end, and nobody is blowing me up on text, so I think we're all right.
Perfect. All right, well, we'll go ahead and jump in. All right, so if you've ever been in a PD with myself or Maddie or anyone from the Deeper Learning Department, you know that we always like to start with our why. And when we talk about the JCPS curriculum frameworks, our why is that purpose statement. So we always want to start with that. The purpose of these curriculum frameworks is to provide schools and teachers with guidance and design principles that are connected with our Kentucky and aligned with our Kentucky academic standards, as well as our backpack of success skills, while keeping the learner in mind, fostering racial equity, and making sure that we're doing what's best for all of our students. Ultimately, our frameworks are our guide and our lever to increase deeper learning and help connect our schools and our learners to our community. So we want to do this great grand thing, which is to bring the best learning experiences to all of our students and make sure that it's aligned with our academic standards, our backpack of success skills, and while we're at it, maintaining learner agency and fostering racial equity. Next slide, Maddie. So our curriculum frameworks are designed as modules to do 5 key things. We want to ensure that equitable and cultural responsible experiences are there for all students. So we don't want just some kids to get those deep, rich project-based learning opportunities or opportunities to engage with guest speakers or community members. We want all of our students to have the same equitable and culturally responsive experiences. We also want to make sure we're creating a cohesive framework for our standards-based instruction that is also aligned with our success skills. So those two things are not taught separately, but our backpack of success skills and our academic standards go hand in hand, that students need to be working on both of them at the same time. When we're designing learning experiences for kids, it's important that we're designing with both of those in mind at the same time. Our frameworks help us do that. We also want to create something that's flexible for teacher implementation. Again, our frameworks are guides. They are designed as a tool for teachers to design what's best for their students right now. No one is trying to say that the classroom teacher isn't the person who best knows their students. These are tools and guides for teachers to help them do the work that's out there. We also want to offer some high quality resources for planning, and all of the resources that are linked in all of the district curriculum frameworks are vetted, they're research based. You can count on them. That's not to say they're the only resources out there and that there aren't other great research based vetted opportunities. These are the ones at the district level, however, that we have looked at and that we know we can count on. So they're included and linked into our frameworks. We also want to make sure that our frameworks are guiding teachers and helping them to reach those deeper learning opportunities, such as project-based learning or service learning and other deeper learning kinds of experiences, and also helping our teachers to create learning experiences that are personalized for the learner, keeping that learner in mind, not just where they are academically, but also who they are as individuals. And we know that our students are coming back to school in a couple of weeks with a lot of things going on in with their families over the summer. So it's important that we keep those things in mind. Next slide.
Hey, Jack.
What can I do for you? What can I do for you? Oh, good. Absolutely. So, Maddie, are you? Let me see where you are. Okay, so there you are. It looks like it's on. Oh, you're good. Okay, rock it out, ladies. Thanks. All right. So, next slide, Maddie.
All right. So we talk about all of these things in a regular person to person context, but we know that the workshop model, as part of our instructional framework, and our curriculum frameworks are there to guide us in whatever environment that we're in. We have some additional considerations for teachers to think about during the design and implementation process, just because these things can look a little bit different in an NTI environment. Not that they won't be there, but that they'll look different. So we definitely, first and foremost, want to think about learner agency. How in a virtual NTI environment can I continue to coach learners to have voice and choice over their pathway to learning, over the way that they demonstrate learning, and to reflect on those choices and begin to take ownership over those pathways? Secondly, how can I use what I know about learners to develop engaging lessons? Last year, we had 6 months or so to develop relationships with learners and really get to know what worked for them, and what would motivate them. This year, we don't have that luxury. So, what are some ways for us to get to know learners virtually, and still take that information and use what we know to develop engaging lessons? It can be done. If you've ever seen an episode of Catfish, plenty of people forge deep relationships virtually, and teachers can definitely forge relationships with learners virtually as well. How might I ensure choice in the way a learner demonstrates learning and growth? So, how do I make sure that there's a variety of ways for learners to approach the way that they show what they've learned? Um, and how do I reflect with learners on those choices so that they continue to grow, and take ownership of those choices? This is also an equity question. We know that not all learners learn the same, and not all learners are able to demonstrate in the same way. So providing those choices also helps us get to a more equitable place as well. Access to learning materials is super important. So how can we make sure that learners have access, and how can we provide enough scaffolding so that learners can access those materials in the way that we need them to? How can I make access predictable? We know that accessing materials was, something that was part of the environment and part of something we went over in the first few weeks of school, or something they were used to. And some of the learning material access questions might be the same, some of them might be different. So how do we kind of take the guesswork out of that and make it an approachable process for kids and for parents, for that matter? How can I share information out to learners, and how can I create a way to share expectations? JCPS did a survey after the conclusion of NTI 1.0, and we saw a very clear correlation between the respondents who reported feeling successful and the respondents who reported that expectations were clear. So we saw from our feedback amongst teachers and learners that clear expectations was really important in making sure that learners feel successful. So sharing those expectations in a consistent, concise, clear way, is one way to help ensure success, and efficacy. And then finally, how can I integrate curriculum and resources, in an NTI world? We know that core instruction is the foundation of what we do, and that foundation should always include deeper learning experiences and personalized pathways, a multitude of ways for learners to access new learning, practice and engage with new learning and skills, and personalized pathways for them to demonstrate that learning. Anything to add, Joe and or Suzanne?
No, Maddie, I think you covered that very well. Again, these are questions to consider as you look at our district's curriculum frameworks and begin designing those learning experiences for students.
And I think as we are considering the design and structures and organizations of our digital classrooms, these are the questions that we need to address and ensure that they are this predictability piece, that there's consistency from teacher to teacher and across schools. So I think these are some really good questions to get us started on the strategic planning of taking the curriculum framework and those resources and content and delivering them in an authentic digital way that centers the learner. So, in the curriculum frameworks for every content, we also provide some assessment guidance in the form of formative, summative, and transfer performance tasks. And so, here on your screen, you see an example um, from ELA grade 8 and module 3, which is typically a unit that we might focus on argument. And so, you'll see here the compelling question from the module. And so, in all of our curriculum frameworks, we are designing around questions, and there are lots of choices and modifications that collaborative teams and teachers can make to those questions. But all of the tasks, texts, problems, content in every discipline is designed around answering some sort of larger question and moving toward inquiry. And so here, what you'll see is the compelling question: how do science and technology affect your life? And you'll see a formative performance task that you might do at the very beginning of your unit of study, then one that's further along the way, and then a summative performance task that pulls all of the standards that are involved in that unit of study together into a holistic performance that involves both receptive and expressive language, and then a transfer task that takes that learning from the world of the classroom, from the academic to the world of the student and the community. So we're seeing that transfer of learning from one context to another. And so what you'll see in these tasks is how the standards, you have fewer standards in the first performance, and they continue to spiral in. We have student voice and choice, and then all the way up to that summative task where all of the standards are coming together. And so you'll see examples of these types of performance tasks in all of our curriculum frameworks that are there to use a backward design lens in your collaborative teams or for teachers as they're designing units of study.
So as we talk about assessment, this is one piece that we'd like to put on the table is the single point rubric. Just as a side note, and we'll probably mention this a few more times, we do have some training sessions on the digital learning channel occurring later this week around a new and improved NTI grading and assessment framework that was developed, again, because of the feedback that we got at the conclusion of NTI 1.0. And one of the tools that we suggest as part of that framework is the single point rubric. The Deeper Learning team and our curriculum friends, among others, have done a few trainings on the single point rubric throughout the years. We're really hitting it hard over the next few weeks, and we'd love to help you with it if you have any questions. So we'll go ahead and jump in. The single point rubric is a shift in thinking in that some of us are used to grading tasks, and some of us are used to grading something on standards. And so the single point rubric is specifically used for grading standards. So rather than grading a worksheet or homework or a test, we're grading for the specific standards or skills that that task is designed to elicit. And so you'll see, just talking about the architecture of the single point rubric, in the left, in the pink here, we have our standard. And then in the green, we have our blank areas for descriptive feedback. And in the blue, we have our performance criteria. Now, when a teacher or a PLC is putting together their single point rubric, this is the only piece, this blue part is the only piece that the teacher or teachers fill in before grading. And the reason is this allows us to have observable, measurable performance criteria to look for to see if learners have in fact mastered that standard. You'll notice there's no continuum here. There's no approaching, there's no, proficient or distinguished. You either have the standard or you don't. You meet the criteria or you don't. The pieces here in the green, again, are for us to fill in descriptive feedback. So if I'm grading Suzanne's task and I see that she has not met the performance criteria, then I would put some very descriptive feedback related to the performance criteria as to why she's not yet met that standard. Oppositely, if she has exceeded that standard according to the performance criteria that I or my PLC have determined, I would put some descriptive feedback in the green exceeding box, letting her know exactly what she did to exceed that criteria.
And so one thing that we wanted to call out was the way in which the standard connects to the MET criteria. And so in the case of the revised ELA standards, the Kentucky Standards for Reading and Writing, you'll see that the multidimensionality of the standard is clearly color-coded. And in order to be at the grade level, a student performance needs to exist in the analytical or purple dimension of the standard. And so what you'll see here for the criteria in MET is we took what that performance at the analytical dimension would look like and made it into an indicator. And then this performance task, students would have a clear understanding of how these standards connect conceptually into a holistic performance of analyzing different arguments. And so we just wanted to call out to you the dimensions of the standard and how the highest dimension of the standard could connect to the indicator of a performance having met at the grade level.
Yes, and I would also add, Maddie mentioned that before students see the rubric as a score for their performance task, teachers would have already filled in that MET column for the purpose of sharing that with students. So when you introduce that initial and the initial performance task to students, you would share this single rubric as a score for their performance task. Teachers already put in that MET column for the purpose of sharing that with students. So we a score for their performance task.
Hey Joe, it's Elaine. I think you're okay now.
Start from, or should we just start from where we just stopped?
I would start from where you just stopped, and then we will edit it together.
Okay.
Hey Joe, it's Elaine. I think you're
So
okay
can you
now.
see this Mastery Connect slide deck?
Yep, we sure can. So you'll just
Okay.
go back into present and then close captioning, and you should be going.
Okay,
Thank you, ladies.
no problem. So we'll resume talking about Mastery Connect. This is just an example of some of the question types that we're able to build within this system. And then in terms of analytics, teachers, parents, admin, even learners have access to looking at their mastery by standard or mastery by unit. And there are a lot of data pieces here that are done for teachers. So that if you've already created amazing Google Sheets or you make these calculations by hand, Mastery Connect does all of that for you. And then we also wanted to show you the rubric building piece. Teachers can build rubrics and grade based on the rubrics right in Mastery Connect, keeping everything in one cohesive system. And so we are really optimistic and excited that this tool will be a great tool to help teachers craft standards-based grading assessments, standards-based tasks, and have really rich PLC conversations during this NTI time. Anything to add, Joe or Suzanne?
I would just say to really contextualize the conversation for the collaborative teams and the teachers that are listening, to really be thinking about how you can leverage the curriculum frameworks for that big picture design around a bundle of standards and around a compelling question, and then use those suggested performance tasks, which you're going to look at through your own lens, and then using Mastery Connect in connection with those performance tasks to leverage descriptive feedback, student agency, and all of those pieces. And so what we're trying to show here is how all of these tools connect into a holistic curricular and instructional design. So teachers should be thinking about that as they're maybe digging into some of these tools, is how to use them with one another.
All right, speaking of tools, we're going to talk about some of the tools that we have to support teachers in planning and designing these instructional experiences.
So within our curriculum frameworks, we have some support for backward planning. And so we have the 4P end in mind planning that includes process, product, and purpose. And then, of course, we have some backward planning support that get at the particulars for both ELA and math. And then we always want our collaborative teams to be looking at their curriculum, the what of what they're teaching and their practices through the lens of racial equity. And so we do have the Affirming Racial Equity tool connected to our frameworks. And that's a really, really important part for collaborative teams to engage in as they're doing planning. And so next week or later this week, we will have some support on some interdisciplinary planning that is a kind of jumping off from what we did in our last NTI round around how do we leverage these interdisciplinary choice boards along with standards deconstruction, right? So we're really digging a bit deeper in the quality of those, and we're connecting the choice boards to standards in a really intentional way that we think will support elementary school teachers in particular. And so we have that training upcoming. And then Maddie and Joe, do you want to talk about the competency-based piece? Because that's an ongoing cohort and work, I believe, that our deeper learning folks are engaged in.
We sure do. The deeper learning team is leading a competency-based education cohort made up of elementary, middle, and high school educators across the district. They have partnered with Two Revolutions and Southern New Hampshire University and potentially some other partners as well to explore what competency-based progressions are, how to use them, and have even crafted some opening competency-based progressions as well. And this, again, to kind of contextualize like Suzanne did a few minutes ago, is to help us shift to an assessment and grading system that's more learner-centered, but it's also more reflective of what learners know and can do rather than what learners have completed. And so we have a few trainings later this week where we're going over some guidance and some updates to the SPPNG around standards-based grading, and competency-based grading and progressions are a part of that conversation as well. So stay tuned for that. Know that we have some innovators in the district that have kind of sprinted out ahead to explore this and help us wrap our heads around what this might look like at a school or district level. But we're at the very beginning stages of this shift. And so we hope to invite as many of you as can attend the NTI 2.0 grading and assessment guidance sessions later this week, as well as future discussions around standards-based and competency-based grading and assessment. Anything to add, Joe?
No, I think you covered it well. And I'm sorry, I was trying to answer some questions in the chat while you were talking, so I may repeat you, but I just wanted to add that some members of our competency-based education cohort, they all were asked to create standards progressions, competency progressions, which are not quite the same, but close, and for a content area. So they have all done that. So we do have some competency-based progressions for different grade levels and contents that were created by this cohort. And it is just the starting point. I mean, we need if we want to move in that direction, everyone to start thinking in those terms of what does that look like at your grade level, and how do we move forward with it.
But again, we're at the beginning of that shift. The Deeper Learning and the whole CDLI team will be there to support you. So just stay tuned on those training sessions. And that concludes this session on the curriculum frameworks.
And so in the coming half hour, we're going to dig into the instructional frameworks, and remembering that the curriculum frameworks are the what and the instructional frameworks are the how. So stay tuned for that jumping off point.
That's perfect. Thank you so much, you all. And we're just, all three of you are going to remain on, right, for this next 30-minute session. Is that correct, Maddie and Joe?
Yeah.
All right, perfect. Well, again, I am Jack Bosley with the Digital Innovation Team, and I'm going to be moderating today. We have Maddie Shepard, Joe McKim, and Suzanne Kramer all here today. And we thank you for joining us. We've got several people monitoring the chat on the YouTube Live portion of this, so be sure to hop in there, tell us where you're from, and if you have any questions, we will try to get those answered. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to the three of you.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to part 2 of our curriculum and instruction chat today. We just finished our session on the curriculum frameworks, talking about those in an NTI context. And now we're going to jump into a similar discussion on our instructional frameworks in an NTI context. Just for those that are joining us now, I'm Maddie Shepard of the Deeper Learning team. We also have with us Joe McKim of the Deeper Learning team and Suzanne Kramer from Curriculum Design and Learning, and she is our middle school ELA lead. And so with our powers combined, we hope to lead you through this session on the instructional frameworks, the purposes, some of the uses, and just again, some renewed contextualization around our new NTI environment.
Can you share your screen, Maddie, or do you want me to?
Oh, yes, sorry. I thought I was already doing that. My bad. Thanks.
And also, I just want to remind you all, or Maddie especially, I think once you get that screen share, will you make sure you hit the closed captioning?
Sure, will do.
Thank you.
Let's make sure that's on. The closed captioning button or menu isn't appearing on the bottom of the screen.
I think you got to share first, or present first.
Okay, it says I'm screen sharing.
Okay, so just go over to your, here you go. You have to hit the present button.
Ah, gotcha.
And then, can you see them now?
There we go. We've got captions. Look, all the words are at the bottom of the screen.
I know. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
All right, so here we again begin with our why. In our last presentation, we started with the purpose and some of the design principles of our JCPS curriculum frameworks, which should be the core of our design for NTI. And then we connected those curriculum frameworks with Assessment and Mastery Connect, which is a tool for engaging students in descriptive feedback and moving toward more personalized and competency-based instruction. And so the curriculum frameworks can be used for intentional backward design using high-quality resources, and that's the what of the content that we're delivering. Instructional frameworks are the how. And so the purpose of our instructional frameworks are to provide a cohesive structure and guide for teachers in designing student-centered learning experiences for the delivery of effective instruction in each discipline. And so today what we're going to share with you is how those instructional frameworks can be sort of reconceptualized and delivered in a virtual way.
And so, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Maddie. I think that was my fault. I'm sorry.
Here we just have a snapshot of the instructional frameworks. We have our math and ELA that are shown here. You can access the instructional frameworks by clicking on the link in the slide deck. Each of the, we have a kind of overview of the frameworks that's on YouTube by clicking here. And just as a side note, this slide deck on the curriculum and instructional frameworks will be linked into the digital learning menu very shortly. So you'll be able to access everything that's embedded. And just as a reminder, the instructional frameworks as well as the curriculum frameworks are linked on the CDLI website as well as in the teacher backpacks. There's multiple pathways for you to access these frameworks. Although there is a little bit of variation amongst disciplines, they're all based out of the workshop model. Anything to add, Suzanne or Joe?
No, I don't think so.
All right, moving along.
And so when we approached this presentation, we were really thinking about, first of all, we need to address where teachers can find the instructional frameworks, the curriculum frameworks, how they can leverage those for the what and the how, and then in particular, how do we capture these best practices, these research-based practices for each discipline in a virtual setting? And so across disciplines, some things that we need to think about within our digital classrooms are the organizations and structure, predictable digital routines, and quality tasks. And so the workshop mostly really lives in that middle column. Of course, those independent and personalized learning, that's a part of the workshop, right? When we think of independent reading as it might connect to a reading writing notebook or a passion project or something of that nature, that's over in an overall organization and structure. But really, it's those digital routines that encompass what we're doing in the workshop. And then we'll talk a little bit about how tasks kind of integrate in the workshop too, because one thing to remember is that sometimes when we think about tasks, we think of them only as like formative and summative sort of academic tasks. But in an online environment, all of those things which we might more organically do in a brick and mortar setting have to be intentionally designed with digital tools and really become tasks for students to engage in. And so Maddie, if you would click on the heading of this, just going to show you a little bit. This is something that I created through an ELA lens. And so what you'll see here are just some reflective questions for teachers to think about as they're setting up the organization and structures of their classroom. All of those sort of pieces in the curriculum frameworks, how do we make those manifest in the organization and structure of a digital classroom? And then if you scroll down, Maddie, to the next piece, so this was the left-hand column of that slide, this is the center, right? And so this is where the work comes alive. So this is where we are, pushing out those mini lessons. We're engaging students in small groups and one-to-one conferring. These are those regular, predictable sort of tasks and dialogues that students are engaging in. And so if you would click on protocols, thank you so much, Maddie. What we really want to think about is not that the technology or the tool is driving the instruction, but that the vision for learning and student learning itself is driving our choice of the tool. And so what you'll see here are some of the tasks that we need to think about students and engaging in, right? Introduction to new material. So is that a Screencastify lesson with a Google form for students to reflect on that lesson? Curating content is a task for us to teach students how to engage in. Communication, we have to set up virtual predictable routines for that, assessing progress. We already talked about Mastery Connect. And so
tasks and purposes that we might find in our learning designs, as well as a starting place for teachers to think about what are some tools to help us accomplish those tasks in our learning design. So we start on the left, and then we kind of go shopping for things that might help.
Hand in hand, setting up these digital routines and using predictable tools for students will help with all of those. And again, purpose and intent, then tech choice.
Hey, Joe and Maddie, Suzanne, it looks like we're having some buffering issues on the actual channel, so just hang tight for just a minute. Let me see what's happening on that end. I know that's exactly what you wanted to hear after my computer shut down 10 minutes ago, but hang tight for us, okay?
That's okay. Thanks, Jack.
Thanks. And Maddie, when we go back, if you just want to scroll to the bottom of the protocols, I'll just talk about how to use those for small group and one-to-one intentionally. Thank you.
All right,
engage, maybe that mini lesson. We have the productive struggle, the independent work, and then we typically have a synthesis or a closure, right? And those happen in different orders with different intentions and different disciplines. But one thing I really wanted to encourage for my ELA folks is to think about more intentionally designing our small and whole group synchronous meets. Rather than maybe just having a discussion or just preparing some questions, how can we really intentionally engage students in dialogue around text? And so what you'll see here are some strategies that we're pretty familiar with, things like fishbowl, Socratic seminars, silent conversations, gallery walks, and we know when those are a really good fit in our units of study. But if you click on the link there, what it will show is guidance from Better Lesson. And you can go ahead and click on it, Maddie. And then Maddie, over on the left, do you see where it says for distance learning? Could you click on that?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. And then what you'll see here, and if you just expand it, perfect, are some step-by-step implementation guidance for teachers on how to use Socratic seminars digitally. And then at the bottom, there are videos modeling that and showing how they can be done in the classroom. And then Maddie, if you'll go back to the document, here I've outlined possible tools that you might need to couple with Google Meet and this strategy, right? And so if our intention is for students to think critically and engage in dialogue about a text, then in our planning, we're thinking we need to do a Socratic seminar. So we might have students annotate a text together in a Google Doc and then come up with questions and then engage in that synchronous meet with those tools, right, to have that dialogue. And then maybe the synthesis, the closure would be students responding in a Google form or something of that nature about their experience, right? And so the idea here is that for our small groups or a whole group synchronous meets, we want to be really intentional about the use of protocols, because we know that protocols democratize the classroom and elevate student voice so that teachers are stepping back and students are doing the talking and thinking. And then we want to use really intentional tools digitally to get at that kind of thinking that we want students to do. And so it may be in math or in social studies or in science, there are different tools for different purposes, but the point remains that if we want students to be engaged in, say, corroboration in social studies or argumentation, that there are some really specific strategies matched with tools that we can use to get at that learning in the instructional framework.
Well, to reiterate a point Joe made earlier, although this document is geared towards ELA teachers and ELA contexts, a lot of the purposes and tasks on this doc are universal. Feedback, Socratic seminars, self-assessments, modeling, silent conversations. These are things that, of course, live in an ELA classroom, in person and digital, but that also live in a lot of other classrooms. So yes, there is ELA in the title of this document, but a lot of these tasks and purposes are universal and have places in any kind of disciplinary instruction. Are there any other pieces of this slide that we wanted to go over before moving on, Suzanne?
No, I think we've captured it. Just really being strategic about how in the first 10 days of school, we are taking the what from that, from our curriculum frameworks and our design, and we are intentionally structuring the how. So we have our predictable structures set up. We are modeling and engaging students in those digital routines in the first 10 days of school. And we have a plan for how all of these tasks will be engaged in by our students. And I think if we can address all of these pieces and be really intentional about choosing the tools that we need, we probably don't need 15 digital tools. We need to be more simple and more predictable. And if we can get this right in the first 10 days of school, I think we'll be really off to the on the right foot for NTI.
So, Suzanne, I just wanted to jump in. We had a few questions in the chat, particularly about some of the tools that were on your protocol document. In particular, one was around Padlet, which is now gone, full pay and whatnot, Flipgrid, which previously did not have approval, but I think maybe pending. So I wondered if maybe our IT folks, IT3 folks who are on here with us might want to talk a little bit about JCPS protocols, what's approved, how to get it, etc. at this point, since there were a few questions about that.
That's a great point, Joe. I think the best resource for that is still to go to jcps.me/software. It's kind of the official place to go to check the status of the different tools. I believe maybe somewhere in the teacher toolkit on the NTI website, there's a document that it's like, I think Suzanne was saying earlier, just trying to simplify the amount of tools that we're using. There was a document that was out there that showed that, but jcps.me/software is the place to go.
And in addition to showing teachers and leaders all of the approved softwares that JCPS has kind of already blessed, there's also a link to apply for other softwares that aren't yet approved to be approved. So if there's something that you really like, something that your school uses, and you'd like for JCPS to take a look at it and make sure that it's safe and aligns with what we're doing, there is a pathway to do that on that website as well. And just to remind everyone, this slide deck will be linked, if it isn't already, on the digital learning channel menu. And so you will have access to all of the embedded links that we've gone through today to use at your discretion in your planning and design processes.
And so to close our discussion today about the curriculum and instructional frameworks, we wanted to kind of zoom out and have this macro level perspective of how these pieces work together. And so in this graphic, you'll see the 6 systems around the outside, and then, of course, equity, deeper learning, culture, and climate. And then in the center is the instructional core. And of course, the student is at the center of the instructional core. And our initial half hour of presentation around the what, which is the curriculum frameworks, that is in the standards and curriculum bubble there outside the student. And of course, that is deeply connected to assessment, which we also addressed in that first half. And then this last half hour, we've talked about those instructional frameworks and how to capture those pieces of our instructional frameworks digitally in a really intentional way that drives learning of standards toward the backpack of success skills and so forth. And so we hope that this graphic sort of pulls together this learning so that you can see how all of these pieces work together with students at the center.
All right, and unless there are some lingering questions in the chat, that is our conclusion of our curriculum and instructional framework presentation for today. Just to reiterate, all of the resources that we went through are embedded in the slide deck, which will be linked on the digital learning menu very soon.
Yes, thank you so much, Maddie and Joe and Suzanne, for all that. I really like that last graphic. And I especially like the document that you were showing. That's the protocol, task, and tools for engagement. I think that's going to help out quite a bit, especially if we can get that document and all our software to align that we have. We'll get some information with that. We're working behind the scenes to try to get a document that's a little bit easier for everybody to understand. So just so you know, we are going to take a lunch break from 12 to 12:30. But before we kind of sign out of all of this, if you go to the NTI website now, if you're looking for what's coming next after the lunch break from 12 to 12:30, go to the NTI 2.0 website. And if you look, this is the homepage of that. That's where you'll land. But if you look under the teacher toolkit, while that session was going on, my super dynamic team added the learning schedule on the page for teachers. So if you click on that, it will take you to the virtual learning schedule for this week. So this is the schedule for the remainder of the week. Coming back at 12:30 is going to be Jenny Averly and Lacey Eccles, who are going to be talking about the knowledge gaps upon reentry from NTI. And you can see that we're going, Kathleen and Suzanne Price are going to be talking about the teacher backpack, and Dr. Coleman and Susan Price and Suzanne Kramer, who's like our #1 person on the show, is going to be we'll be talking about the 5 basics, and then closing out today is standards to construction with Suzanne again and Ryan New. So somebody needs to send Suzanne a gift basket, I think, for doing all of that. So anyway, thanks again. We really appreciate, that was a great inaugural session. You guys are fantastic. So lots of great resources. Thank you all. Enjoy your lunch.